Welcome back, everybody. It is so nice to see everyone. So here we go. We are about to start an incredible new series, and the series is called The Why of Judaism. The Why of Judaism. And this series comes in the footsteps of having spent a little bit of time doing the what of Judaism. What do I mean? Is that for the last year, we went through, not in this year, but 5 days a week, a chapter a day. We went through the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the summary of the Shulchan Aruch, written by Rav Shlomo Ganzfried, and in his 221 simonim, which we did in 255 stages, because some of them were a little longer, we went through a significant amount of whats of Judaism, like what to do in all these circumstances. Now I realize that a lot of people have trouble with the whats unless they have the whys. You need to have a little bit of a sense of why to be able to understand the what. So what I thought of is as follows. Rather than going simad by simad, but rather areas of life, one after the next. Let's spend a little bit of time trying to understand the whys, trying to understand why it is that we do what we do. Be'ezrat Hashem. Today we're going to be learning, and we thank the sponsors of today's share, Barbara and Jack Siegel, in honor of the yahrzeit of Jack's sister Sylvia Strix, Sima Bas Alexander Zisha Halevi, Alei Shalom, on the 6th of Cheshvan. That's the first yahrzeit. This year.
No. That's the youngest sister.
I didn't realize. And also for Joseph Schwartz, Yosef Meir ben Mordechai Halevi, and that is Barbara's father, on the 9th of Cheshvan. So this week is replete with yahrzeits, and it's also I did not realize that there's Levis on both sides. The neshamas should have aliyah on both sides. We also want to thank Karen and Michael Rosenblum, who are sponsoring today's learning. For Michael's grandfather's yahrzeit, Rav Ben Sion Rosenblum, Harav Ben Sion Aryeh ben Harav Shmuel Yaakov Alav Shalom. Michael's father's yahrzeit is shortly upcoming, but his grandfather's yahrzeit is right now. And he died very prematurely. He was a shul rabbi, a very prominent shul rabbi in the Bronx, and he passed away very young, 41. And there's a lot that's said about him, because even in that short period of time, he did an incredible amount. To read just the entry into the YU commentator at the time, this is in the 1940s. Yes, so it describes how Ben Zion Rosenbaum, one of the most prominent rabbis in the metropolitan area, passed away Monday morning at the age of 42 of a heart attack while at work in his office in Kingsbridge Heights Jewish Center. Arriving in this country at the very early age from Lithuania, he received his rabbinical degree from Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary at the age of 22, immediately after which he assumed his first pulpit at the congregation in Kiryas Beth Jacob of Savannah, Georgia. Rabbi Rosenblum held an AB and an AM degrees from NYU in Columbia, respectively, and was formerly an instructor of psychology at Yeshiva College. Very active in Jewish affairs, both local and national. He was a past president of the National Poal HaMizrahi and also the director of synagogues in Yeshiva. In the rabbinic world, Rabbi Rosenblum was an outstanding figure, having at one time been the chairman of the placement bureau of the Yeshiva, past president of the Bronx Council of Rabbis, and before his death, vice president of the Federation of Bronx Jewish Congregations. Remembering at that time, the Bronx had over 400 shuls at this point in time. So just a very and it makes a lot of sense to understand where Michael comes from. And the Neshama should have an aliyah, be'ezrat Hashem. Let's start. So I figured, let's start in the morning, right? So we wake up in the morning. Let's ask lots of why questions. And I don't know how fast or slow to go, because there's so much to talk about. But I would like to encourage everybody to submit lots of whys. Meaning, if you have any thoughts about the next stage, next topic is going to be religious items. So that could be on the men's side, tzitzis and tefillin, but also Sefer Torah mezuzahs and that area. So I'm going to encourage everybody to ask lots of whys, and please send them in, because if it's a good question, usually it's addressed. And if it's not addressed, we just need to dig a little deeper. So let's start off in the morning. The first thing we do when we wake up in the morning, we're supposed to say Mo'adei Ani. So why do we say Mo'adei Ani? Right? Why do we say Mo'adei Ani? This should be a pretty obvious one, because gratitude is an inbuilt human mechanism, right? So Hashem allowed us to have gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But specifically, actually, a lot of the language is actually patterned after a pasuk. The pasuk says, "Chadashim labekorim, Rabbi Munasecha," renewed in the morning much is your, how do you say, translate the word emunasecha? Faith. Now, does God have faith? So the more correct word is faithfulness. Faithfulness, right? His trust in us, meaning he's renewing us because he has faith in us. He believes that there's something that we can accomplish every day. And so there's chadashim lebakarim, that people are renewed every single morning. A remarkable thing. Do you know where that pasuk appears? That pasuk appears in the 3rd chapter of Eicha. It's good to see that the person who lanes the 3rd chapter of Eicha is right here in our shul from a parchment. So it's the third chapter of Eicha. And I think that says a lot about the way that we think about life. Is it sometimes from the experience of suffering that gratitude emerges, and so it's really worthwhile. We just lost a very, very special person, Rabbi Moshe Hauer, who was the executive vice president of the OU. I was very close to him. I used to spend a lot of time being trained by him. I was in a special group of rabbis. We used to go to his office quite frequently to spend time with him. So just last night, actually, somebody sent me a video of his, and he was talking about a person in his community who passed away very young. Nebach lo aleinu, passed away very, very young, and he was 2 months later, his brother, the brother of this person, was killed in a car crash. Terrible thing. And he goes to the funeral, and he's walking out, and the mother of these 2 boys is walking out of the funeral, and he decides to speak to her. And he says to her, "What can I say? What is there to say?" And she just lost her husband of almost 70 years marriage. And he said to her, "What should she say?" And she said, "I'm not going to be sad about what we lost. I'm going to be grateful about what we had." That's what she said to him. And I felt that was helpful for helping me process his passing at the age of 60. He was 60 years old. But it's sometimes in Eicha is the way we start the morning, which is Chadashim Labakarim. Right? There's so much suffering, but there's so much we have too. And it's in the depth of Yirmiyahu's Eicha, which is where we start off every day, which is there's a lot to be grateful. There's a lot that does work. There's a lot that we do have. That's how we say Modani. Did you notice when you say Modani? And this is something that just I noticed personally, is that whenever you say thank you to Hashem, you're moving. Do you notice that? So for instance, you wake up, you sit up and you say Modani. When you get to shul, the moment you say Mizmor Latoda, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to stand up. When you're in your Amidah and you say Modim, what do? You bow down. In fact, if you're saying Hoidu, thank you, in the Hallel, that's the time where we shake the lulav, right? Meaning every time there's a moment of gratitude which is expressed, there's a lot of action associated with it, and I feel in a certain sense it's trying to shake us out. The liturgy is trying to shake us into the awareness of gratitude. Every morning, every moment where we do this, I believe that because our habits allow us to habituate the words we say, and this is the time we're not supposed to be habituated. So that's the first question. First, why? Interesting question. You are not allowed to pray without washing your hands, right? This is the easiest thing for people to forget. You're supposed to wash your hands in the morning. We'll get to that in a second. But why are you allowed to say Mo'adani then? Meaning, why are you able to say Mo'adani if you didn't wash your hands? You didn't go to the bathroom, you didn't wash your hands. And so the poskim explain is because it actually is a light prayer, a prayer diluted. It doesn't have God's name in it. Mo'adani lefonecha, there's a pronoun in there, but there's no God's name, which makes it more available to get under the radar of the necessity of washing hands, which is why we're allowed to do it first thing in the morning, Mo'adani. Okay, that's the first thing. We wake up, we start the day. The next thing you do is you're supposed to wash your hands. A lot of people wait. You shouldn't wait. But the question is, there's a few questions. So why is it that we're supposed to do Netilas Yadayim in the morning? And there happens to be that there are 3 separate reasons. Most people are not aware of this. There are 3 separate reasons for for washing hands in the morning. Reason number 1 is as follows, is that we know that when a person awakens in the morning, it's like that person is considered a new awoken person. A new person in the world. Beautiful. And that means to say that when a person now starts their service, when they start doing what matters, right? So, meaning as opposed to sitting in front of a screen and playing games, right? That doesn't matter, right? When a person does something which matters with their life, then it's a metaphor of a kohen, a priest in the temple, going to serve in front of Hashem. Like he was bringing the karbonos, that was service. When we go and we navigate tefillah, Torah, gemilas, chasadim, all the different things that we do in our lives, and that's a very, very broad portfolio. When we do that, that itself is service in front of Hashem. And like the kohen would wash his hands renewed every time he came into the temple, we are entering the temple of our lives. And as we enter the temple of our lives, we wash. That's the first reason which is discussed. The second reason is the Zohar teaches us that when a person sleeps at night, there's an impure spirit which rests upon the person. And so in the morning, the first thing they do is they wash away the remnants of that impure spirit. We'll get to in a second what that means precisely. And the third reason is because when we're asleep, we are involuntary, which means we're not in control of ourselves. And therefore our hands will touch areas of our body which are usually covered, and that requires washing. That's true in the day too. So let's say some people like to fidget a lot, right? They stick their hands under their shirt, right? Or in areas which are sweaty, they need to do Netilas Yadayim too. So at nighttime, it's most likely that you did that. It's most likely you scratched yourself somewhere, and therefore necessitate washing in the morning. It is interesting that those different reasons actually play out in halacha in a very interesting way. And that is as follows, is that the first two reasons are reason number 1 and 3, the idea of being a new creation, entering the temple as a new servant, and the idea of the Yadayim Askaniot, of the hands touching different places, which are the reasons given by the Rashba, Rav Shlomo Ibn Aderes, and the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher. This is already going back 800, 700 years. Those two reasons are seen as the two predominant reasons. And therefore, you can only say a bracha on Netilas Yadayim if you have both of those reasons. Let me give an example of where this doesn't work. So let's say that you wake up and you go to sleep at night, you wake up at 3 a.m., and you remain awake until the morning, right? So in this case, you have your hands might have been busy, and it's a new day, because even though you woke up at 3 a.m., then that becomes your new day, so you would do a bracha on your Netilas Yadayim. But what happens if you go back to sleep? Let's say you wake up at 3 a.m., you go to the restroom, or let's say you don't even go to the restroom, because that itself necessitates washing hands. You go back to sleep. In that case, you would not say a bracha if you did Netilas Yadayim then, because that's not Chadashim Labakarim, that's not the new day for you. It's only that your hands might have been busy, right? So you wash them because your hands might have touched an uncovered place, but then at the end of the day, you do not have both reasons. So let's say a person takes a nap during the day. One has the reason that one's hands may have touched an unclean spot on the body, but one is not a renewed soul for a new day then, so then one would wash hands, but without the bracha. Meaning you need to have both those two primary reasons converging for it to be done as well. Similarly, if a person stays up all night, on the one hand, let's say on a Shavuos night, a person is starting a new day, but they were in control of their faculties, they were in charge of what their hands are doing, and therefore they would not be able to say a bracha, they would not be able to say a bracha until Netilas Yadayim. The simple eights in that case is what to do is go to the bathroom. Because you go to the bathroom, right, now you have both, right, because now your hands have been uncleaned, and it's a new day, then that would be sufficient for that. So just understand how the whys have a very important implication when it comes to the whats, when it comes to this particular one. Now, so why is it that you should not really move around before you go to wash your hands? And there's a certain level of scale when it comes to this, which I'm sure you're aware of. So we all know people who have the negelwasser under the bed, right? Or right next to the bed, right? They have their wash basin and so on. That's because they don't want to even walk a few paces without washing their hands. So some people rely on the halacha that within one room is considered within a few paces, in 4 amos, and therefore you don't need a rush. And that means to say, what you do when you wake up is you walk straight to the bathroom, which should be adjacent to your bedroom, and then you wash, and that should be sufficient. But either way, the notion is you're not allowed to walk 4 cubits without washing. Why is that so necessary? And this comes back to the middle reason, that of the Zohar, which says that a person who walks for amos without washing hands is liable for death. It's a very serious, because there's a spiritual impurity clinging to a person at such time, which is why people are very careful about this. It's so easy to fall into bad habits because of this, because one gets busy, there's things to do. I'll tell you the one thing which exacerbates this is if you check your emails or texts the first thing you wake up. First of all, you're going to sleep worse, right? Number one, it's a really bad habit. But number two is that you're going to forget. Something's going to happen, and you're going to check the weather, and you're going to check the news feed, and you're going to check, right? So there should be a barrier between the world and your life, and it should not be the barrier as being waking up. It should be something else, right? In order to be able to do this. I try to make it that it's davening, right? So I try to make it that I'm only going to check the world after I daven. And it's so liberating just because then, okay, it's all right. And I know some people wake up really early and that's not realistic, but there should be a barrier. One should be washing hands before anything else. And the Zohar says because there's a ruach tumah which stands on a person. So you say to yourself, like, what does that mean? Like, what is that? Like, this is a little bit of an exception. This is not a why question. But what does that mean? Like a pure, impure spirit? Like, I don't see it. I don't touch it. Like, what does it mean? So the way it's understood spiritually is as follows, is that we are a unique combination as a human being. We are a body, right? We are a primate. And also we are a spirit. I remember we once went to the zoo, and one of my sons was 2 years old, and there was a huge gorilla who was just sitting by the glass wall with his back to us. And my 2-year-old said, "Daddy, why is that man not wearing a yarmulke?" So, yes, it takes a little while to explain that man has a lot more hair than the regular man in the street, although sometimes the men in the street act a little worse than the man behind the glass. But nonetheless, so we are primates, right? And we have primal urges too, in the same way. But we, unlike animals, actually we have most of the same bodily function as a primate. But we have opposable thumbs after all, right? As we use for texting. But we also happen to have a soul, which is a higher calling. So what happens is that during the day we navigate that. We're always struggling, right? It's like, Dunkin' Donuts once had a great ad, is that lunchtime is over and dinner is a long, long time away. A long, long time away. That was like their jingle, right? And so the idea was basically as you're driving past, just like, like an animal who sees a juicy morsel, just just drive in. Now they put in the calorie count. It takes all the fun out of it, right? It's like, you're prorating every bite. But nonetheless, so the world around us is asking us to act like animals that see a fruit hanging on the tree and just put your teeth into it. But we as human beings make decisions because we have a higher intellect, and that's coming from a higher calling, and that allows us to navigate, to thread the needle of the complexity of being an animal and being a soul at the same time. At nighttime, you lose that. At nighttime, as the soul recesses somewhat, that doesn't mean to say it goes away. It means to say the higher parts of the soul are able to be less tethered to the body, and only the lower parts of the soul remain intact. Then that balance is offset. And that's when it's called nefesh habahamis, which means your instinctual urges remain. You remain as simply a body which is recharging, which is amazing. We have the capacity to recharge, but it's a body predominantly during that period of time, which means there's a vacuum. There's a vacuum of the spiritual persona which exists at night, and in that vacuum there's a residual remainder of that experience. Right? We're more animalistic when we wake up in the morning than after a day of work as a human being. And therefore, that is expressed in what's called ruach tumah, which is one of the reasons why we wash our hands. We're washing our hands to become a human again, not just a body that was lying there. Okay, so it's important to appreciate that. That's the way it's generally understood. So why should we avoid touching things? We're not supposed to touch bodily orifices, right? So you're not supposed to clean your eyes, your ears, your nose. You're not supposed to put your finger into your mouth before you wash your hands. It's seen as a dangerous thing. And that is because the impure spirit rests on specifically the hands. Specifically the extrema, but the hands predominantly. And one does not want to introduce that into the cavities of one's body. So one has to be very careful about this, to make sure to wash hands first, even before perhaps even just wiping away the sleep from one's eyes as well. And then the question becomes, so why the hands? Like, why the hands out of all things? Meaning, if the person remained as a body, specifically, why the hands? So it's seen that as a person wakes up and there's a renewal of the soul, the renewal of the soul is becoming more firmly attached into this complex enterprise called human being. At that point in time, the tumah goes to the extreme, it goes to the edges. And the edges, one of the edges is the hands, and specifically the hands as well, because the hands are what's busy, right? The hands are the places, the parts of one's body one uses to touch. So being as it's the edges, right? It's sort of the edges of where the tumah comes. Kabbalistically, and I don't understand this, but this Kabbalistically also relates to the nails. The nails are seen as the edge of the body. That's considered a place of tumah. It's sort of a what's called klippa, literally a shell, a husk of the body, which is where one needs to wash as well. So that's where the tumah resides more predominantly than any other part of the body, which is why we wash it as well. Why is it washed 3 times? Like, why should you do it 3 times? Technically speaking, one with a big enough amount of water is sufficient. But the reason that it's given that for 3 times is because that constitutes a chazaka. A chazaka is where it's considered like a firm removal, where you're actually making sure. And oftentimes when people don't have a lot of money or water or patience, they use less than the right amount, and therefore it's better to actually do it 3 times, because this way one ensures that it's being removed as well. Why is the bracha al netilas yadayim? Like, what would, if you had to word that bracha, how would you word it? You need to wash your hands. You would say al rechitzas yadayim, right? Rechitza means washing. Netila doesn't mean that, right? So it's a natleim actually means to lift, right? Natleim v'nasem ad olam, right? So there's netila means to lift. So it is interesting that it relates to a few things. On the one hand, halachically speaking, you need what's called koach gavra. You need to actually have human force. So you can't just go to a fountain and put your hands into it, right? For a number of reasons. But one of them is you didn't effectuate that water flowing down to, you need to actually be the one to do it. You need to lift the water. And more than that, also you lift your hands. The Sfaradim have this practice. Have you noticed? Sfaradim, when they wash their hands, they actually say the pasuk Su'i lechem kodesh uvaruchu et Hashem, right? They lift their hands. So that there's a notion of the hands being lifted, and certainly metaphorically, if the hands were in a state of impurity, we're lifting them heavenwards at this point in time, and that's called intila. Happens to be another interesting fun fact that in Aramaic, the name for a vessel, for like a little cup, is called a natla. Happens to be just an interesting thing. So netilas yadayim also relates to the Aramaic word natla, which is that. So for those who are not fluent yet, there's a new round of Shnai Mikra starting now, and if you want to train your Aramaic, now's a good time to do this. But that's another word that comes over here. Why is it left pouring on the right first? So usually we say just because the right is predominant, right? But in this case, it's more than that. It's that the left is seen as more of a vacuum, the non-dominant, and nothing against the lefties. It's the reversal in that sense. It would be the other way around. But the non-dominant is seen as a place where there's more tumah. There's more the sitra achra, which means the other side, right? So what you do is you take the non-dominant and you use that as subservient to cleanse the dominant, right? So you're taking the sitra achra, the other side, use the weaker side to cleanse the purer side as well. And then it's a good question. That's a really good question. According to this, you should, although I know in halacha that's not the case. So this reason. Now, what is interesting, I just want to take an aside because it's a really good point. Is where am I putting all of this from? But just for a second, is so there's so many different svarim you can look for these different types of ideas. One is there's a book called Sefer Tamei HaMenhagim, which is an excellent book, which is called it's the book of the reasons of practice, right? Some of them are more esoteric practice, some of them are very practical practice. That's number one. Another one is called Likutei Ma'ariach, written 150 years ago. Very similar type of style, which has actually been reprinted recently with very legibly. And then also the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch himself weaves in some Y's into his what, although he's predominantly a what sefer more than a Y sefer. So we try to understand this as well. Yes.
When we leave a cemetery, also.
Yeah, we'll get.
Also with the cup, with the
yes,
water.
yeah. So we'll get to some of the other instances as well. But that's the same kind of thing. Is A cemetery is a place of vacuum.
I was told years ago that when one goes to sleep, the normal 12 to 6, let's say, it's like when it's dead. And that's why when one wakes up, one has to do these rituals.
There's an emptiness, there's a void of the soul. The soul is not animating you for that period of time. But in the same sense, a cemetery is a place which is a vacuum of life to a large degree. And therefore there is a ruach tumah which is in the cemetery. One shouldn't be going to the cemetery unnecessarily. For a yard side, for things, yes, but it's not the kind of place to take walks in. And so it's and therefore it's also seen as a place. It's not that's why there's hesitation. If you know the whole question about pregnant women, and some people dismiss it altogether. It's not a healthy place for a human being to be unnecessarily. And part of that is expressed in washing hands afterwards. Is in the void of active life. There's no such thing as void spiritually. Into that void, other forces exist. Yeah, what? Yeah, there's well, there's other reasons, psychological too. But yes.
The cemetery is a place with tumas, but yet people go there to daven to Hashem.
You're right. Because there are holy people buried there. Right, the Kivrei Tzadikim, when there's holy people buried there. But the cemetery itself, in general, first of all, not everybody is holy who's buried there. But number two is that there is what's called a ruach tumah in a cemetery as well. That's why Kohanim are not allowed to go there, right? So when there's an absence of life, a Kohen's not allowed. So that's expressed. It's a little bit of advance. Let me get a little further along the road. I'd love to take questions at the end if that's all right. Okay, so. Why do we throw out the washing water? Now, we take this for granted, of course, it goes down the sink. But like sinks were only invented in the last century. For most of human history, there was no sink. What do you do with the water? So there's a whole discussion, what do you do with the water? You're supposed to put it onto wood chips so it goes down, or on the ground in an area where people don't walk, or you throw it outside of the house, right? Meaning we didn't have drains. In fact, you didn't have faucets or taps. You used to go down to the river with your bucket in the morning, and that's how you would have water, right? And then where would you put this? So you'd have to throw it out. And the reason is because when the tumah is extracted, removed, or washed away from their hands, the water carries that. And that's not seen as a good thing. So that's why it's so important to put it in a place where people are not going to walk on. One's not supposed to tread on that water or be exposed to that water as well. Same thing, by the way, with Mayim Achronim. People are not aware of this. The Mayim Achronim is supposed to be covered, which is why all those fancy, the fancy ones that got the holes in the vessel sits on top of them, it's meant to be covered, right? It's meant to be that the water's not uncovered at the table, assuming that's the same reason. Why must we wash from a cup and not just a tap? Meaning, you're not supposed to open up the faucet and just let the water out. And the answer is because in addition to what's called a koach gavra, that it needs to be with your own force, it needs to also have a kli. It needs to have a vessel as well. We know this because in the same parallel of a kohen going into the base of the Mikdash, the kohen would have to wash their hands. It needed to be that water went through a kli, that was called the kiyar, the wash basin. So we replicate that process when it comes to our experience as well. So you say, what about the pipes? The answer is the pipes aren't a vessel because the pipe has an opening at both ends. In fact, the pipes go all the way back to the reservoir, wherever it is, upstate in New York or in Long Island. It's a different source that the water's coming from, or the water tower. And actually, water tower would be easier. But there's not considered any kli, right? A reservoir is not a vessel. Goes all the way through pipes which have no container all the way to the tap, and it's a problem. On a train or an airplane, it's actually a little easier. If, let's say, you don't have a cup, you can, technically speaking, use the water that's released from the faucet there because there is a tank, right? So there is a tank which is holding that water, and so you technically speaking, you're allowed to, although I've noticed recently in El Al, they've just put in the nice little metal cup there, right? So it's very fiddly to get it out. But that's because some people are not happy with that. But technically speaking, on an airplane, there is no pipe, right? Right? Just in case you've been looking around airplanes, no pipes on the side, right? That's because there's a tank inside the airplane which is carrying the water, which you're using when you open that faucet. So that would be technically speaking sufficient when it comes to your washing your hands. Now let's do a little bit of getting dressed, and we'll hold it here because it's just I just don't know how far to go in it today. When you get dressed, so we know that you're supposed to put on the right side before the left side, or vice versa for non-dominant, for left-hand dominant people. Why is that? Why is it? And this, by the way, this applies to putting on shoes, feet in pants, arms in jackets, whatever else it is. Arms in shirts are supposed to be. And people are like, wow, Judaism's pretty granular. You're like, yep. And it's actually wonderful. I remember actually there was a particular comedian who was making fun of, like, if Christians were Jewish, like if Christmas was a Jewish holiday, it's like, was the tree 6 tvachim high, and was it at Shkia, and when did the holiday weekend begin? Was it at sunset or at stars out? And he's making fun of all these things. It's amazing. Like, the further you get from traditional Judaism, the more it just becomes the external skeleton of practice, which you don't realize that you will make fun of. But nonetheless, it is interesting to think that there's a lot of details, right? And it's important to realize that details matter. And actually, I'm very thankful to be in a space where details matter, because it's not arbitrary how I put on my shirt, right? It's not just what I do. And the Department of Religion comes to when I enter the synagogue or the temple, and then outside is my life, right? It's like, no, sorry. In that dark winter bedroom, as you're waking up and trying to get dressed, Judaism's still playing a role, right? So it's really liberating to know that you don't have to make all the decisions about your lifestyle, because there's a larger picture here. So nonetheless, you're supposed to put right hands in first, if that's the dominant side. Why is that? So the reason is because we know that the Torah actually describes this in the inauguration ceremony of the Mishkan. You notice that in Parshas Tetzaveh, where the Torah describes the anointing of the first priests, because remember, the Mishkan was built predominantly by Moshe under his auspices, and he served as the priest during the first days, for the first 8 days of its inauguration. And so when he inaugurates, when he brings in the first Kohanim, which is Aaron and his sons, there's a number of processes which relate to they have to take the blood of this korban, they have to place it on their ears, on their thumbs, and their toes. There's like a whole process if you read that through there. And the Torah is very specific. Al boy and yadoi, hayamonis. Right? It is always on the right side. So the inauguration ceremony was always seen to be right predominant when it came to that, which is why when we, and like here it should be an echo to us, is somehow when I'm putting on my shirt today, I'm like the Kohen being inaugurated to the service in the temple. That's a pretty profound statement, right? So I don't feel like today is too special, and I don't feel like I'm too special. But apparently, as I put my arm into my shirt and I catch myself to do it the one way, not the other way, I'm reminding myself that today, somehow, my service matters. That's a very profound perspective to be reminded of, even through that orientation. However, it's worthwhile noting that doesn't go for everything. So, for instance, when it comes to tying things, left goes first, right? So, technically speaking, if you were to watch a Jewish person correctly putting on their shoes, the way it would go is as far as now today, because we've moved into the realm of convenience, everything is Velcro. So, you don't have to do any tie. God forbid you should have to. My kids don't know how to tie their shoelaces. They just simply slip them on and off. And I'm trying to explain to them, even the amount of energy necessary to tie their laces is too difficult for today's generation. That's the madrega of where we have, demented our children to, because nothing is difficult anymore. But nonetheless, in the days where you used to be able to tie laces, or you had straps to put on, it should be the left. So she goes, right shoe on, left shoe tie, right shoe tie, right? A, B, B, A. That's where it goes. It's chiastic in structure, very, very literary. Okay, so why is that? So the reason is because actually it relates to tefillin. Tefillin is meant to be tied for a right-oriented man. Right-handed man is tied on their left side, which means that we're reminding ourselves of the tying of the tefillin as well, which is interesting because if you go back to Avraham Avinu, he had this interesting conversation with the king of Sodom. He liberates the king of Sodom, predominantly actually his nephew, but everybody else as well from the first empire in the Middle East, essentially. And he says to him, take whatever you want. And he says, mechut vatzroch now. Right? Chut means I won't even take a thread, and I won't even take a leather strap from you. And that's understood to mean, and that's why he and his children were merited the mitzvahs of tzitzis, which is chutim, strings, and srochnal is tefillin as well. But what he meant in reality was srochnal means to say the straps of a shoe, right? How did shoes work in those days? You can, the old shoes had a bottom part, and then they had leather straps which held the bottom part in place, right? That was just simply the way it worked. So there's a connection between the way one puts on one's shoes and the schus of what Avraham Avinu generated later on, that he would be able to put leather straps on his left hand as well. By the way, this would reverse, therefore, for a left-handed person, because they're putting the tefillin on the right side, just out of interest. Okay, why should one remove it in the opposite way? So it's the same difference in respect, meaning if the going on is right shoe, left shoe, tie left, tie right, then the opposite is true. Untie right, untie left, deference to the left, meaning doing it second. Take off left, take off right, difference to the right. Because it's they're saying the opposite thing. Most people are like Rabbi, that's a little bit intense. There's a lot of details here. It's like, yep, you can get yourself into great habits very easily. It just takes a few weeks, and you will realign yourself and realize you can be trained by yourself. It's an amazing thing, and it becomes second nature, which is not the point of the program, because you're supposed to be thinking about it. But nonetheless, it is visible. Why is it? Why is this so important? So if you look in the more Kabbalistic Svarim, so the Yismach Moshe as an example, makes the observation is that what we do on a physical level also relates to what's happening on a spiritual level as well. And he says that the right and the left correspond to attributes of right and left in heaven as well. Not my department, but understand that there are different things going on. And so for those who it is their department, they're telling us that that the words of the sages have deeper meanings, and they're not just immediate evidence to the casual observer who's saying it doesn't make so much a difference. Why is it forbidden to put on two garments at once? Did you know this? If you're not supposed to just take your shirt and your fleece and put them on at the same time, right? You're not supposed to do your undershirt and shirt and put them on at the same time. Now, I know some days feel like you just need to do that, right? It's like just being like the night to the day, and it's like just so crazy. So this is actually what's called kosher l'shichacha, which means that it will lead to forgetfulness. This doesn't mean where the keys were. It means to say that spiritually, there's certain things which are not going to be readily available to one. And this is seen, and again, these are words which are hard to understand. The Likutei Mariach talks about this, there's a notion what's called an or makif, that a person is surrounded by light. And as one puts on one's clothes, there's a certain barrier, but that barrier then is normalized, right, with the surrounding light. If one just is hurrying that process, right, then in a certain sense, one has created a disturbance in the light which is surrounding, the aura which is surrounding one. Now, I don't know, I understand this fully, but there are people who do. I know people who can see the light around people. Regular people, they're just more sensitive. They live very sensitive lives. They can tell you the color around people, right? So just be aware of this. This is not. There's most people are not in this category, but just regular people, not tremendously spiritual people. They can say, I can see the aura around that person. Why is it wrong to place one's clothes near one's head at night? So this would be a common practice. Is, let's say you don't have a pillow. So what would people do? They would, especially going camping, so you'd wrap up your fleece, and that would be your pillow. You're not supposed to do that as well. And part of this is because the garments have a spiritual influence, and placing it by the head strengthens the harmful forces that can disturb one's mind. Fascinating. Did not know that. But generally speaking, one's also supposed to sleep with one's clothes next to one's head. Why do men cover their heads? This is, right? I actually had a friend who was once propositioned by a Mormon fellow, very, very polite, with a nice tie and jacket and the whole business. And he said, can I interest you in something in the Bible? And he said, I'm sorry, I'm already covered. Right? So why is it that that's the practice to be covered? So interestingly enough, this goes back to the Gemara in Kiddushin, talks about the notion of walking around with humility. Walking around with humility is that and apparently the male folks need this a lot more than the female folks. Just pointing this out, is that it's considered a chutzpah to walk around with an uncovered head as well. And by the way, you'll notice that in some of the sources, and I'm not going to quote them here, they will say it's not enough just this. It needs to be the whole head is covered. And so I understand, like in the Hasidic world, right, where people that there's this intense. This is generated from a particular angle in halacha, but it is also seen as interesting enough because it became such a common practice in Judaism. And over the number of last centuries, it's reached a stage that already the commentators in the Shulchan Aruch, like the Taz, says that it becomes what's called chukas akum not to, right? Which means the Torah says Loi selchu b'chukas agoyim. You're not allowed to act in the way of the nations around you, and that there's a lot of fascinating applications that we're not going to get to that right now. But if there's a practice which becomes uniquely Jewish, and then you throw it away, you are now entering into the world. And by the way, that's why people take off their yarmulkes. That's exactly what they do. Because they want to integrate into whatever meeting they're going into or whatever job interview, understandably. But that's precisely the point, meaning it's proving the point. It's like, so that would be considered mechukas akum. This was not the original reason of it, because at the beginning that was not the case. This is a practice which over the time has emerged, but has now got to that level of gravity, which is such. More complicated, like ask yourselves in the streets of London now or Paris. Not so simple. It's not so simple as well. It's a funny thing that the Jews are the only people who wear baseball caps now. I'm like, you want to catch a Jew on vacation in Europe, all you need to do is look for the baseball cap, because no one else is wearing a baseball cap except for the Jews who don't want to show their yarmulkes. But nonetheless, it's complicated. It's a complicated topic. Why should clothes be clean? Well, there's a halacha that you're supposed to wear clean clothes, and it's so annoying. That coffee stain, right? That little drop that, I always find that I have magnetic ties. They're magnetic to oil, right? It seems to be like, but you're eating and there's always something which falls. You're supposed to change. You're not supposed to wear that. Why is that? Listen to this beautiful language that I found in the Shloah HaKadosh. The Shloah HaKadosh says that clean clothes will keep a person's mindful of having a clean body. And having a clean body will keep a person mindful of having a clean soul. Is that fascinating? And there's something very deeply profound. It's what's called grounded cognition, right? The way I view myself, right? I view myself in the context of myself. And there's going to be a cognitive dissonance between how I'm acting and how I'm being, which needs to be equalized. Equilibrium needs to be arrived at. And so if I am living and I'm acting in a way which is clean, it's going to mean I'm going to start being in a way which is pure as well. It's a phenomenal thing, which is really important. Think about clothes. Clothes are called as mechabdusa, that which gives me honor. So therefore, we have to be very specifically careful when it comes to this. Now, there's a lot of halachas that surround going to the bathroom. Just two whys, because there's a lot of them, like why you say Asher Yatza when you go to the bathroom makes a lot of sense, right? So I don't explain this. Why do you need to wash your hands? Makes a lot of sense. But why do you need to dust your dime? Meaning, like, surely it should be enough just to wash your hands with soap, right? Meaning, we know it is a unclean experience. So wash your hands with soap, right? I don't know. I unfortunately, even that doesn't seem to be so obvious today, right? Sometimes you go to the bathroom, you see the guys who are like, straight from the stall to the door. You know what I'm saying? You're like, I'm not touching that door. But that's that's how it goes, and you get to shake hands with all these folks, So what's going on over here? So, assuming that everybody's washing their hands, right? So why is there Netilas Yadayim? And so it's understood. The Magen Avraham explains. He's one of the commentators of the Shulchan Aruch. It is for cleanliness, but it's also for the fact that the bathroom itself is seen as a void space, much like a sleeping space, right? A place which is void of spirituality. You're not allowed to bring in items of holiness. You're not allowed to speak about items of holiness. It's seen as a vacuum, and in vacuums, it's seen as impure. So the Netilas Yadayim is actually a spiritual cleaning. It's interesting talking to children about this as well. Children will always say, "But I washed my hands," and the answer is yes. But washing hands is different to Netilas Yadayim, right? There is physical cleaning and there's spiritual cleaning. They shouldn't be merged. They're not the same thing. So it's not enough to do Netilas Yadayim and say that I'm clean. My hands are biologically clean. And it's not enough to say that my hands are biologically clean and spiritually clean. So those are two separate things as well, which is why you'll notice like a lot of shuls are set up to separate those two experiences. So as an example, in our shul, there's the bathroom which has faucets and soap, that's for the cleaning, but really it's better to actually do the Netilas Yadayim outside, which is why there's a Netilas Yadayim station outside. That's not always the possible, but it's actually, those are two separate stages, and is reflecting there as well. And there are halachas which relate to washing oneself every day. Again, we're talking in the day of pre-running water, which most of the world is still in, right? We're living in the Western bubble, but in the world of pre-running water, go to Africa and see what's going on there. It's not for granted. So, but in the world of pre-running water, the Jews still had the halacha of washing their hands, their feet, and their mouth every day. That was necessary as well, and it gave us a great head start when it came to the bubonic plague, which is why we were blamed for it, right? But nonetheless, we have this responsibility. Now, I understand hands and I understand feet. Why mouth? And so the Shulchan Aruch says the reason for a mouth is because you're waking up in the morning and you're about to speak to your Creator, and your mouth needs to be a place which is holy. So you need to take out all the spit, all the things that remain in your mouth in order to be able to purify your mouth before you open it to sanctify Him. I'm always intrigued, and I'll leave you with a last why question, which is, why is it that Hashem created one organ which does the most of a physical activity, which means you shove in all the food into that organ, right, into that orifice, and it's the same organ which has the capacity to talk the most spiritual and holy and to sing. Isn't it fascinating that the one organ is one which has the most physical, it's the vehicle of physical sustenance, and yet it is also the vehicle of spiritual, emotional conversations. Why would it be that Hashem created that as such? But nonetheless, it's reflected in this. I'll leave that with you as a question. I hope this is an intriguing